Guys, welcome back. It's 10:35 and it's a good morning, unless you just heard what I was going through. But regardless, we're just so happy to be here with you this morning. I'm Diane Michael. I am the co-founder of Beyond the Boardroom and own a marketing company called Callan Group Communications. I'm here with my friend and business partner in Beyond the Boardroom, Lindsay Lombardi, who is a CAM who has seen it from every angle. She's been a portfolio manager. She's worked for corporate management companies. She's worked with family-owned management companies. She's got her own company. She's been on site, so she understands what these CAMs are going through every season, and she's here to help us keep our P's and Q's in order when it comes to what's going on in the industry seasonally. If it's your first time with us, welcome. Thank you for being here. If it's your second, third, fourth, 10th, 12th, welcome back. We appreciate you coming back to our free education. Our goal at Beyond the Boardroom is to educate board members and CAMs in an easy way at your desk on your mobile while you're traveling. And educating board members, Lindsay will go over in more detail on her part. Warren Buffett says some pretty great quotes, and one of them that I like is the more you learn, the more you earn. And that's something I personally live by and professionally live by. And that's what this program is about. We know how important education credits are for your license. You have to do it. And just to be aware of the industry trade, seasonal topics, all of the things that are going on, because things change regularly, statutes change yearly, and best practices are always getting better. And that's exactly why we launched this program. We started on the fourth Wednesday of each month and have already grown to now offer education on the second and fourth Wednesdays. So please mark your calendars for the next webinar Wednesday happening on June 24th. Today, we already had an HOA EH2 credit. Today, we have the beautiful Kelly Whitaker, who is going to be providing a CE for IFM, and then we have one CE for ELE after Kelly. I will add the agenda in a minute. And what we always like to do is to show our educators where everyone is coming in from and whether they are a board member or if they are a CAM or both, because I know there's sometimes both. If you want to put into the chat where you're coming in from, we'd love to show Kelly. The whole state of Florida is with us this morning, and you can also kind of see who's here with us and where everyone's coming in from. We sincerely appreciate that. I'll leave the chat open for that for a minute here. Okay, Lindsay, do you want to go over how the credits work for me, please?
Sure. So, as those of you who have attended before or were here earlier, you know that we do everything possible to make sure that you get your credits, but there are things that you have to do on your side to make sure you get your credits. So, please stay for the entire presentation until the end. The way that this works is at the end, we will share a link for you to go to our website. And that is where you will submit your information for credit. You have to do this for each course that we teach. So if you did it earlier today for the first course, you will have to do it for this course, and you'll have to do it for the next course. You'll go put your first name, middle initial, and last name as it is on your CAM license. And then we will provide you, again, the course name, which today for Kelly is Water, Wind, and Liability. And then we will give you a code word. So whatever code word we give you, you have to put in that submission. If you don't have the code word, you will not get credit. If it's not the correct code word and you try to make one up and guess, you will not get credit. So please, please, please make sure that you stay on for that, and also make sure that you have your CAM license number correctly so that you make sure that you put it in correctly. We've had a few people that have been off by a number and didn't get credit and then came back upset, and we fixed it, but we have to kind of go do some searching to figure out why you didn't get credit. So please make sure you put your information in correctly. Obviously, mistakes happen, and we'll help you in times if that is the situation. But the main thing is you need to stay on for the code word. We put it in the chat. So those of you who, we received a couple emails that said, we didn't understand what you said the code word was. Well, if we cut out, if you didn't understand it, okay, but we do put it in the chat. So make sure that you pay attention to the chat so that you can see what the code word is for the courses.
Thank you. Also, very quickly, we send weekly updates on this program. So keep watching those emails. We send at least one a week, and that's to make sure that you are aware of what's coming up because we know that your year end is coming up in September where you need your 15 continuing education units. And so we are doing our best to get all of those for you. So you're going to want to add our email to your safe sender list. Or if you're not receiving weekly emails from us, go to your junk or your spam box and find our email. And at that email, report not spam, add to safe sender, and keep those emails filtering to your board members and to other CAMs so that they can get the education for free that they may be looking for. Okay, I'm going to put the remainder of today's agenda in the chat in just a minute, but I would like to introduce Kelly Whitaker with FCA Insurance, helping community associations navigate risk with confidence. When it comes to protecting community associations, experience matters. And Kelly brings more than 2 decades of insurance expertise to the table. I always say, Lindsay says it too, we always say, you wouldn't know by looking at her. She's just so beautiful. 2 decades is a long time, but it means she's very knowledgeable and she's been doing this a long time. A Florida native and graduate of Cumberland University, Kelly began her insurance career in 1997 and earned both her Florida 220 and 215 licenses in 2005. Throughout her career, she has held leadership roles ranging from operations manager and commercial lines department manager to vice president, building a deep understanding of the unique challenges faced by businesses and community associations alike. Today, Kelly serves as a key member of the team at FCA Insurance, where she specializes in helping associations identify, manage, and mitigate risk through thoughtful insurance planning and education. Beyond her professional accomplishments, Kelly is a passionate advocate for community association education, and we know that by her participation today and in participation working with us for years now. We've seen her at many events. She currently serves on the board of the Volusia Community Association Advisors, VCAA, supporting educational opportunities for community association managers, board members, and maintenance professionals. She has also represented the industry through participation in CAI's Congressional Advocacy Summit, contributing to important discussions impacting associations across Florida and beyond, which we know is so important. Known for her practical approach, industry knowledge, and commitment to helping communities succeed, Kelly brings valuable insight and real world perspective to today's webinar session. Please help me in welcoming Kelly Whitaker of FCA Insurance.
Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm so glad to be here. If anybody has seen me present before, this is going to be a new course, and it's going to talk about some of the most frequent calls that we get in regards to associations. Probably for anybody in the state of Florida, we get calls about water, wind, and liability. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Hopefully you all will learn quite a bit. Hopefully you've not had to experience some of what we're going to talk about today, but my guess is a lot of you probably have. So when we talk about the Florida risk landscape, each part of the country has its own trials and tribulations that you have to deal with when it comes to insurance. So in California, you have fires. In other parts of the country, you might have tornadoes. Some parts of the country, there's ice storms that insurers are concerned about. In Florida, we are fortunate to have that beautiful ocean by us, but it also brings with it the lovely hurricanes that come periodically, as well as we get some flooding and we get tornadoes occasionally. We get hailstorms in the spring, seems to be when hailstorms like to visit us. And then we get just random Tuesday afternoon windstorms that can cause damage in Florida. So those are part of the risk concern that insurance carriers think about when they're looking to write insurance for a property in Florida. With it can come some liability issues as well. As a CAM and even board members, there is an important role that you have when it comes to risk management. You want to make sure that you're doing what you can to avoid damage to the property as well as liability risks. So whether you're an HOA that owns buildings or doesn't, or you're a condo association, there is still an important role that you play in avoiding those types of losses. When we talk about buildings that you have to maintain, there's a lot of new regulation that's come in the past 5 years as far as your structural integrity reserve study that's going to help you plan to make sure that you can maintain your building. A well-loved building is one that's going to survive a hurricane much better than one that has a lot of deferred maintenance. You want to make sure that you've got debris potential taken care of before storm season and throughout storm season. You want to make sure that if trees need trimming, that you're doing it in a timely manner so that you don't have a lot of debris laying around when a storm's coming this way. You want to make sure that residents are, notified appropriately and have the ability to care for their part of the property and well as get to safety. Even if you maintain buildings that are not subject to the milestone inspections, you want to still make sure that you are routinely having those buildings inspected by a professional, because even if you're only 2 stories, you can still have a lot of the same issues that a tower will have. So you want to make sure that even though the state's not requiring it, that you're still, as a CAM, making sure that that building is maintained. And then other things like lighting and surveillance cameras can help prevent liability claims as well. And those are all responsibilities of the CAM and the board members. There are a lot of common misconceptions about insurance, especially in the state of Florida. I would be very interested to hear from any of you at the end of today's course if you learned something that taught you that what you thought about insurance was not actually how it actually is. I'd love to hear that from you. A lot of what we heard from insureds after Hurricanes Ian and Nicole was that they thought that if flooding occurred during a hurricane, that it would be covered under their homeowners or their property insurance policy. And that is definitely not the case. True actual flooding that occurs from storm surge or, accumulated water is true flood insurance claims, and that's not like a sink overflowing. A lot of people will say if a leak occurred in their home that the home flooded, but that's not a true flood. So if flooding does occur, that would be covered under a flood insurance policy. A lot of other misconceptions have to do with deductibles. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. People don't realize how large their deductible can be when it comes to hurricane damage. Another misconception is that if you're not in a flood zone, then you don't have to carry flood insurance. When actually everybody's in a flood zone, it's just a matter of how high the risk is in the zone that you are in. And those zones can change from time to time. So you could buy a home that's in an X or a low rated flood zone, and then it could be remapped. And all of a sudden you find that you're now in the high risk flood zone and have to carry flood insurance. Usually it's a lender that's forcing you to carry certain types of insurance, but that doesn't mean that you're not subject to the possibility of that type of damage. A lot of the flooding that occurred from hurricanes Ian and Nicole and even Milton occurred in the X flood zone. And another misconception that we hear about is people think that if you own a home or you own a condo unit that you have to carry flood insurance, and that's not the case. There's no law that requires you to carry it. That is either going to be forced again by lenders, or some condos might have it in their bylaws that owners have to carry insurance. Okay, now on to the really fun part, talking about insurance coverage itself. Hurricane coverage versus standard property insurance. We refer to hurricane coverage as wind and hail coverage in the insurance world. A lot of people just call it hurricane, but wind and hail is going to incorporate obviously hailstorms, tornadoes, tropical storms, hurricanes, and then standard property insurance is going to be your all other perils such as fire, lightning, other types of water damage. Then you also have flood insurance, which we talked about briefly, that is mostly provided through the National Flood Insurance Program, which is the government FEMA program. That's where a lot of the reduced flood coverages are provided. And then you can also purchase private flood insurance directly through an insurance carrier. And those policies are going to mimic the National Flood Insurance Program to a large degree, but they do have some additional coverages that you can get through them. When it comes to an actual HOA or a condo association's property, it's not going to provide a lot of the coverage that you're looking to get that the National Flood Insurance Program doesn't provide, such as coverage on pools. I believe the sublimits you can get for private flood on pools is only $20,000. That's not going to do much for a condo association or an HOA's pool replacement. Then we have wind-driven rain. This is a more complex coverage than it probably needs to be, but this is currently how it is handled in the state of Florida. Wind-driven rain coverage is when wind is pushing rain around doors or windows. It's not creating an opening in the building, but rain is still seeping through, which I'm sure if you live in Florida, you've experienced this at some point in time in your home or in a condo, whether it's a lot or a little. Again, if a hurricane comes through and blows the roof off and rain damages, that's hurricane coverage. But if no opening is made, the windows are intact, and that rain is just seeping through, then it's going to be wind-driven rain coverage. And it's not typically covered at the full property limit. There's usually a small sublimit for that coverage. It could be $10,000, it could be $250,000, but it's not a very large limit. And most policies, not all, but most of them, the wind-driven rain coverage is still subject to that large hurricane deductible, whether or not that damage occurs during a hurricane. So it could just be a regular, lovely storm that we have and it occurs, but it's still subject to that hurricane deductible, even though it wasn't caused by a hurricane. All policies are going to have exclusions and limitations. Property insurance policies exclude flood or storm surge. Flood insurance policies do not cover outdoor property, such as seawalls and pools. Some carriers are now not wanting to include outdoor property, such as fences, because they know that's usually the first thing to go in a hurricane. So you just want to make sure that you're aware of what your insurance policies are not covering so that you can plan accordingly. Okay, we have insurance on our building, but it doesn't include the fence. So we need to make sure that we know what we're going to do when we have to replace those fences, whether it's we have a fund set aside for that, or we're going to have to special assess to repair the fences, or if we decide we don't want to replace the fences, if that's something that your bylaws allow you to decide. Every year after your policies renew, you're going to get your declarations page in the mail. Some policies you'll get your full 100 and something page policy. The flood insurance itself is usually just a one-page deck page that you get. And you're going to want to make sure that you are reviewing it to make sure that you know what your deductibles are. So in the event that you incur that type of loss, you know what the out-of-pocket expense is going to be for the association, and you know what the policy limits are as well, so that your expectations are correct. National Flood Insurance Program flood policy for condo associations has a max limit. It's maxed out if you take the number of units times $250,000. That's the most amount of coverage you can get in the National Flood Insurance Program. So if you have a $20 million building, but your max limit is $10 million, you still have another $10 million that in the event of a catastrophic full loss from flood, you're not going to have coverage for the entirety of that loss. You can either buy excess flood for that, or just be aware that that's the limitation if that loss does occur. So those are just things, again, that you want to know ahead of time, and probably even have a game plan in mind of what's going to happen if we don't, if we need to cover this deductible, or we don't have the full coverage that, you probably wish you had after the actual loss. You also want to know things like actual cash value versus replacement cost. The market has improved quite a bit for property insurance, so you don't see it quite as much, but there are some property insurance policies that might limit how the roof of a building is covered. So if your policy says it's replacement cost except for actual cash value, if your roof covering is over 12 years old, Then if you have a 15-year-old roof and a hurricane comes in, they're going to pay you a depreciated value on that roof. Hopefully you've funded based on your SIRS and you already have the funds available to make the replacement on that roof when you add in the depreciated value you get from the insurance carrier. Again, that's just information that you need to know so that you can plan ahead of time and don't have to plan when disaster has, struck us all and everybody's in a panic. Deductibles and financial responsibility. In Florida, we like to make things as complicated as possible when it comes to insurance. I don't know why, but that's just the way it is. Hurricane deductibles are a percentage based. I'm sure a lot of you have seen on either your own insurance policy or your association's insurance policy that it's got a wind and hail deductible, maybe of 2%, maybe 5%. A lot of people think that the percentage is based on the repair costs, that if you have $100,000 in repair costs, that your deductible is 2% of that $100,000, and that is not the case. The deductible is a percentage of the total insured value of your building. There's varying differences on how those deductibles can be applied. I'm going to try to make it as palatable as possible. You can have a hurricane deductible, you could have a named storm deductible, or you could have a wind and hail deductible. A hurricane deductible is the best because it means that that large percentage deductible is only applied in the event of a hurricane. So if you have a named storm, then you're going to have a much smaller deductible than that large percentage. Or if you had a tornado, it's going to be a much smaller deductible. A named storm deductible means that you have that larger percentage deductible anytime any type of storm with a name comes through. So it could be a tropical storm, it could be a hurricane. And then a wind and hail deductible is the least favorable because any type of wind or hail storm is going to have that percentage deductible applied. I know that was not fun for anybody involved, but hopefully that came across somewhat clear. Then you can have that percentage applied towards the entire policy value, or it might be applied just based on each scheduled item on the policy. So that again is something that you want to have a discussion with your agent about so that you understand when one of these storms occurs, what the expected financial situation is going to be from the association and owners. Then you have on your policy, your property policy, you have an all other perils deductible. So that means all other perils other than the hurricane or wind and hail, whatever that deductible is, all other perils will have a different deductible. So for a fire, for instance, typically a condo association is going to have a minimum of a $5,000 all other perils deductible. And then there's coverages such as wind-driven rain, water damage, or equipment breakdown that could have separate deductibles aside from those other deductibles we talked about. Who pays? Is it the association or unit owners? Well, it's kind of one and the same, but when it comes to the property insurance policy, the association is going to be responsible for that deductible. They could be responsible for repairs that are under the deductible. Let's say that you had a storm, but you didn't quite meet what your deductible is. So the association is out of pocket for all of those repair costs under the deductible. And then unit owners are going to be responsible for damage to the inside of their condo unit, or obviously if it's a homeowner, they're going to be responsible for the debris in their yard, the damage to their individual home. The governing documents should dictate how insurance proceeds are handled. They could also dictate how it's handled for repairs at a home or inside of a unit in case a unit owner is not making the necessary repairs in a timely manner. If you're in a condo association and there's a mold concern, if an owner's not treating that as a serious issue, then that can impact the owners around them because that mold is going to grow fairly quickly, especially if the condo building doesn't have power to have the ACs running at the time. Then you're going to deal with special assessments. So that's something that your insurance agent for your association should be able to help you with. But if you have to do a special assessment for storm damage, fire damage, any type of insurance claim, you need to know how that's going to be allocated to owners and work with the board to make sure that that's handled in a way that complies with their bylaws and plan accordingly. Again, there's going to be storms where it's not severe enough to turn in a claim, so those costs under the deductible are going to be the responsibility of the association. Or you might have severe damage and you're going to have a huge insurance claim, but you still have to figure out how to pay for that large deductible. Immediately after a storm or a fire or whatever the claim might be, you want to make sure that you're taking photos of what has occurred. You want to make sure that if water is involved, that you have a company that can come out and determine what is wet, do moisture readings. Any vendor that comes out, they need to rigorously document what they're finding so that when they provide that to the insurance company, when they provide their estimates or their invoices, that the insurance carrier can clearly see that there is actually damage and get that claim paid out for you. They also need to know what the cause of the damage was. So you have to have a vendor who can say, okay, this damage is from a hurricane, this damage is from lightning, this damage, if it's wear and tear is not something that's going to be covered on an insurance policy. The resulting damage might be, but if you have a piece of equipment that has worn out, that's not going to be covered. But if the piece of equipment wore out and then there was damage from that, then the resulting damage could be covered. But you need to have it documented what caused the actual damage. That's how the carrier is going to determine if there is coverage and what deductible is applied. In the state of Florida, it's required by law and in your property insurance policies. Once a hurricane watch or warning has been issued for any part of the state of Florida, then it's considered a hurricane deductible for anyone in the state. So even if it hits the West Coast as a hurricane, but it doesn't hit the East Coast until it's downgraded to a tropical storm, people on the East Coast are still going to have a hurricane deductible applied. And that is in effect for 72 hours. You want to make sure that you notify your insurance agent or carrier immediately once you know that there's damage, especially if it's a storm. If it's a storm, you want to get on the phone as soon as possible, because if damage is severe enough and there's a lot of people that are dealing with property damage claims, then the adjusters are going to get busy very quickly, as are the contractors. You now have a year to file a hurricane claim in the state of Florida, and you have 18 months from the date of the storm to file for any supplemental claims. Other claims, I think you have 4 years to file for that, but you want to make sure that you file it as soon as possible to prevent any hiccups in the claims process, so that an insurance carrier can come out and see for themselves that the damage is there and what caused the damage. As a CAM, you want to know, it should be in your contract whether or not you're going to be the one handling large claims for your associations. Some property management companies, I think, charge extra if a CAM is going to be handling a claim, because it is not an easy process. It is a lot of extra work. I would strongly suggest that you assign a particular board member to be the contact for that claim. So if your agent or the insurance adjuster, the contractors, whoever it might be, they have one point of contact instead of having to talk to 3 or 4 different board members and not knowing who has what information. You want that to be streamlined. So it's important to assign a specific board member and make sure that the insurance agent knows the contact information for that board member in the event of a claim, so they know exactly who needs to be called, who needs to be on site if an adjuster or a vendor is going out. Common delays and how to avoid them. I think the biggest delay in the state of Florida is that when a storm happens, there's a lot of us that are impacted and there's not enough contractors to go around. So having to wait for either a contractor's availability or parts to be available can be a big delay. It's very important to have your vendors lined up ahead of the time that you're going to need them. If you know that you've worked well with a certain roofer or drywall contractor or emergency response contractor, make sure that their information is on file somewhere, that people can get access to it and you know exactly who you want to call. If you're having to look for a contractor after the storm has happened, it's not going to be pretty. And you're going to get a lot of contractors in the state that are from out of state that you don't know what their work is like. You don't have anybody to get a referral from. They could be gone as soon as, the next storm happens and your work's not even completed. Expectations when it comes to a settlement and dispute resolution. I think the most important thing to know for an insurance claim is that your initial payment that you get from the insurance company is not necessarily the final payment. You always want to read a check before you sign it to make sure that there's no stipulations, that once you sign it, the deal is done. But because of new timeframes that the state has put in place for insurance carriers, they have a specific time frame that they have to get back to you and they have to get a payment to you by. So they're going to be making sure that they meet those state requirements and get you a payment as soon as possible. But it could be that you don't have all your estimates in yet, or that you found additional damage. And in that case, you're going to want to go back to the adjuster and provide them with those additional receipts and documentation and request the supplemental payment. I strongly suggest that you create some type of form. I've made one for my customers where you can track what the damages are for your association, what the estimates are, what you've gotten paid by the insurance company, so you can clearly see it and not have to, thumb through a file of 100 pages with, 20 different estimates from contractors to figure out what's been paid and what's still outstanding. Everybody getting stressed out like I am just thinking about all of these potential hurricane claims we could be dealing with. Vendor coordination during emergencies. Very, very important. Pre-approved vendor lists. I cannot stress that enough. I'm sure any CAM that's dealt with this would say the same thing. Please have a list that's in the hands of multiple people, especially your designated insurance board member. The CAM obviously will need to have it, of the vendors that you're going to want to call, the vendors that you can trust and will, get back with you as soon as possible. Emergency response contractors. I always suggest that you try out an emergency response vendor before you decide to use them for a hurricane if you can, meaning if you have a water leak in your building, call one of these emergency response companies and see how they do with that small leak, so that you feel comfortable with them and you are confident in calling them when a hurricane happens. There's a lot of companies out there that will just drive down the street and you don't necessarily know how their work is going to be, or if you even like the work that they do. So try one out if you have the possibility to do so before a storm, and then get them lined up as a VIP. A lot of them will come out and map your property and make a file so they know in the event of a hurricane where they need to park, where the shutoff valves are, things like that, so that they can get on site and get everything happening as soon as possible. Mitigation versus permanent repairs. So mitigation means that you are putting tarps up and covering things so that additional damage doesn't occur, because the insurance company wants to pay for the initial damage, not damage because you decided not to tarp the roof or not to put the AC on to prevent mold. So you need to do what you can to prevent additional losses from occurring as soon as possible. You can do that without the approval from the insurance company, before you make those permanent repairs. Certain policy, like citizens policies, they cover for temporary roofs, but they only cover for tarping. So just be aware that if you pay for a much sturdier temporary roof, because obviously during hurricane season, a tarp isn't going to do much if another storm comes through, but just know that there could be some limitation on what your policy reimburses you for. Make sure you keep all of the receipts for any of those temporary repairs. The most important thing that I think a CAM and board members need to know about a building if they are responsible for a building, whether it's an HOA clubhouse or a condo association building, is where is the water shut off? We've had so many claims that got so much worse because they spent 30 minutes trying to find where the shutoff was for the water to the building. So that's one of the most important things that you can know about your building is where the shutoff is. If you and your owners have fans and dryers and a dehumidifier in their unit, that's going to be one of the biggest helps to them, because if they have water in their unit, then they can get those fans on, they can get the dehumidifier on, and try to limit the damage from that water sitting in the drywall or in the carpet or in the floors. Generators are something that Floridians flock to Home Depot and Lowe's for when we hear a storm is coming. You want to know ahead of time, if you're in a condo building, how you're going to allow the hookup of generators in the event that the building does not have power, so that people can run whatever they need to run to stay in the unit if it's safe, or also so that if there's water in the building and an emergency response company comes out, that there is some power if they don't have generators with them. That's a very good question to ask when you're interviewing emergency response companies, is if they have generators available to them. Something else you want to be prepared for is if you are in a building that has a fire safety system, and if you're required to do fire watch, if that fire safety system is not running, you need to have a plan so that you know how to start that fire watch. And also keep logs. If it's your employees that are doing the fire watch, you want to make sure that you are keeping a log of the time that they're doing that fire watch so that you can submit that to the insurance company. Very important to keep communication open between the vendors, CAMs, and the insurance companies or your agent. Another point is to have that designated board member as the insurance contact. You want to make sure that you're staying in communication with them. I would never just sit there and say, well, they said they'd call me back. Make a nuisance of yourself if you have to get what you need done for your building, for your HOA. Avoiding fraud and unlicensed contractors is very important, especially after a storm. I get calls all the time from contractors that are trying to, come out and look at my house because my neighbors supposedly had storm damage. They're not supposed to be doing that now, but it still happens. An assignment of benefits is asked for a lot on the door-to-door contractors that come by. They might say to you, I can get your roof paid by your insurance company. I just need you to sign this so I can get up on your roof. And it's actually an assignment of benefits, which means that you're assigning the benefits of the insurance policy over to that contractor so that they have full control over the insurance claim and the proceeds. They also have the ability to sue the insurance company if they want to without having to get your permission. And abuse of the assignment of benefits has led to a lot of the fraudulent activity that we've seen in the state in the past couple decades. Check Better Business Bureau and DBPR for contractors. You can even check the workers' comp division. It's a public website. You can check to see if a contractor has workers' comp insurance or an exemption on file. A workers' comp exemption is only good for the person that's holding it. So if it's an owner of a painting company, for instance, and he has employees, the exemption is not good for the employees. So he would still have to have workers' comp in place for his employees. Something else that I found you can do if you want to check the validity of a contractor, check your local county or city to see what permits have been pulled by that contractor. We found before that a contractor is trying to get a roofing job on a condo, and we looked to see what permits they pulled in the past. It's just been single family homes. So they had no experience on a condo building, which is a little bit different than a single family home. And then a big thing that you want to ask for are referrals from a contractor, so you can call some of your neighboring communities to find out what their experience was with that contractor. All right, recap of key concepts. So our biggest coverage issue today was talking about deductibles. You want to make sure that you know what type of hurricane deductible you have. You want to make sure that you are prepared before a storm happens, or even a fire or a large water loss. You want to have which you need lined up ahead of time so you can just pull out your plan and follow it step by step and not having to, stress and try to figure out on the fly because that's the worst time to figure out what's going on. And being prepared as owners as well, making sure that owners know that they can have dehumidifiers and dryers in their units. And, as a community, if they don't need them and somebody else does, they can share those. There's a lot of prep that you can do for an HOA as well. HOAs, you want to make sure that you know what's going to happen for debris removal after a storm or what needs to be done for your clubhouse or your pool, whatever your amenities might be. A lot of issues to talk about as we start up storm season. We're just at the beginning. We've got a long way to go. It's half the year that we get to enjoy the possibility of storms. So at this point, we can, you want to do the open discussion or you want me to go through the test?
Well, we have one question, so let's answer that and then we can go to the test after if we
Sure.
don't have any more questions. So it says, I live in an HOA. If members cut down trees in April and leave 4 to 5 large pieces of trunk debris in the yard, which could become projectiles, is the HOA liable if we don't notify them to have it removed? Note, we have no fine provisions.
So usually the cities have a large debris pickup date. If they're cutting it down in April, that's not as big of a concern as if they're doing it in like August, September. But it is a concern when you see your neighbors starting to cut stuff down when you know a storm's coming in 2 days. So I understand the concern. Is the HOA liable? That's going to depend on what your responsibilities are in your bylaws. If somebody complains about it, then that's really not an insurance question as to what they can do, but you shouldn't be liable as an HOA unless your bylaws say that you're responsible for the debris removal.
Okay, and then someone asked if Kelly could provide the checklist they provide to customers for a claim. We'll provide Kelly's contact information at the end, and if you want to reach out to her, I'm sure she would be happy to provide you with something on that.
Yes.
Okay, we can move to the quiz. Do you want me to ask the questions?
Sure.
Okay. All right, so question 1, which type of insurance typically covers rising water from storm surge? Oh, hold on. Let me turn on the chat so you guys can answer. I guess that would be helpful. Okay, the chat is on. A, windstorm policy, B, flood insurance, C, liability policy, or D, property insurance.
Looks like
Lots
everybody
of
knows that one.
Ds.
Flood insurance.
All right, good job. B is the correct answer. Question 2, hurricane deductibles in Florida are usually calculated as A, flat dollar amount, B, percentage of insured value, C, monthly dues, or D, vendor estimates. All you CAMs better get this correct.
Looks like they got it.
All right, B, percentage. Good job, guys. Question 3, wind-driven rain is typically covered under A, flood insurance, B, windstorm property policy, C, auto insurance, and D, liability insurance. B. Most of you guys got that one too. You're paying attention. Question 4, who typically coordinates emergency vendors after a disaster? A, residents, B, insurance company only, C, CAM or board, D, city officials.
Everybody's begrudgingly answering that one.
CAM and board members, good job. And that is the time to make sure that you have all of that information on hand for who you need to call because anything could happen any day now. All right. What is the first step after property damage occurs? A, file taxes, D, document damage, C, replace items, or D, call accountant. Well, you may need to call the accountant to see how much money
Find
you
out.
have to pay for that damage. But B, document the damage. Question 6, flood insurance is most commonly required in A, all properties, B, high-risk flood zones, C, only inland areas, D, never. Okay, B, high risk areas.
Most commonly, it's in high risk areas.
Yes, but I will say after the last couple years, you just never know
You do
where
not.
you're going to get it
You do
because
not.
some of those areas that stayed high and dry were not high and dry.
No.
All right, question 7. What document outlines coverage limits and deductibles? A, lease agreement, B, declaration page, C, HOA newsletter, or D, vendor contract? B. Good job. All right, 8. Claims delays are often caused by A, too much documentation, B, lack of documentation, C, fast reporting, or D, small damages. All right, B, lack of documentation. Make sure you are taking pictures and keeping notes because never fails that you have to go back and refer to that to get them what they need at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, 9. Who may ultimately share responsibility for deductibles? A, only insurance company, B, only vendor, C, association and unit owners, D, city. Okay, as we all know, association and owners. And 10, best strategy to reduce liability exposure. A, ignore risks. B, prepare and plan ahead. C, cancel insurance. D, wait for damage. B, correct.
C hurts my
Prepare
heart.
and
Don't cancel
plan.
your insurance. All right. That was so much fun. Everybody had fun, right?
I think so. I always say you make insurance fun.
Any other questions for me?
All right, I don't see any questions. Last call for questions in the Q&A. Anyone?
All you cams, go back to your computer and find one policy to look at and see if you can figure out what the deductible is. Just
There
for,
you go.
just for fun, just for a good Wednesday afternoon fun time.
And everyone, before we go into the credit side, we just cannot highlight the experience, professionalism, and communication that Kelly Starr and the team at FCA Insurance provide. We know many CAMs that use them, associations that use them. I've personally used them for my home. And we work with Kelly regularly. So their service areas are through the entire state of Florida. So if you are not satisfied with your current representation and the communication or the education or the, just support is not up to the board's standards or to you as a CAM's standards, then we highly recommend taking a picture again of Kelly's contact information and seeing what needs to be done because she's been writing renewals for months now already. So she's on top of it. We know she's on top of it, and we highly recommend
Thank you.
FCA Insurance and all the work that they do.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, Kelly.